backyard. And when I say backyard, it means any outdoor space that you have around you. So it could be literally your backyard, or it could be a small park that you have nearby, or it could be just out your apartment window. There's always green space in the area. And that's where we should start first when we're doing our beginning birding, because it's what we see the most. Okay, so let's see here. There we go. Once again, my name is Liz Hersman. I'm the wildlife educator for the Wisconsin DNR at Horicon Marsh. I'm also a member of the Horicon Marsh Bird Club. So if you are interested in birding, there are a number of bird clubs around the state that are always welcoming new members, and they are looking to bring new folks into the sport and the hobby of birding. So what is birding? Well, it's pretty much as simple as you think. It is just watching birds. Some people are going to be just your casual birders in their backyard, and others are going to travel the world to find as many as they can. And so that's the beauty of it. You can stay in one place for as long as you want, or you can take as many adventures as you'd like as well. Some people like to make it into a contest. If you've ever seen The Big Year, and others like to keep it just fun and as a hobby as well. And there's also many people that love to keep lists, right? A lot of people are listers and they want to tally and check off every single bird that they've seen. And there's nearly 10,000 kinds of birds and species of birds known to exist in the wild. And the beauty of that is, like many species, there's more being found more than often than not. And so it's a challenge that never ends, which is the beauty of birding. So what does it take to be a good birder? Well, just like any hobby out there, the interest has to be there. If you don't have an interest in cooking, you're not going to want to cook very often or get really ambitious about it. If you don't enjoy playing soccer or have an interest in it, you're probably not going to play very much. Well, it's the same thing with birding. If you don't have an interest in birds, you're probably not going to pick up a pair of binoculars and start studying them. Okay, so there has to be some newfound interest in this type of hobby. And so that's what I'm hoping you are all here for, is that there is some spark, there's some sort of interest in birding, and we can just grow that as we're here tonight and hopefully answer any questions you might have about how to get started or even how to continue your beginning birding lesson. And so why is it that there is that spark? What is that draw to birding for people? And a lot of it is that this can be a lifelong hobby. It's not something that you can only do when you're young or only do when you're old. You can literally do it lifelong. This is a picture here of my then 2-year-old who's already picking up a pair of binoculars, and he is a fine birder now. He's very, very good at doing a lot of our backyard birds and wetland birds at Horicon Marsh. The other thing about birds, you can take it anywhere. There are birds in every continent in the world. And so basically anywhere you go, you are going to see a bird of some shape or form. And it doesn't really have to be expensive. If you're just doing backyard birding, you just need a few simple tools to help the birding be more enjoyable. And that's it. You just need that outdoor space. And it's really suitable for all different types of personalities. I know that there are some people that are introverted and they love just doing things on their own. Well, with birding, you can do that. You can sit at your kitchen window and you can enjoy watching the birds, or you can go for a walk by yourself. Or if you're a more extroverted person, you can definitely go as a group. As I said, there's lots of bird clubs and field trips where you can go and meet new people that have the same interests. So it really is tailored for anybody. And you can learn about other things. That's what I love about birding when I'm out, is when I'm in a natural area, I'm not just going to be drawn to the birds that are there. I'm going to be looking at the plants and the other wildlife and the butterflies. And it's going to give me this full picture of the natural resources that are around me. And when you're helping birds and when you're going birding and when you're thinking about birds, ultimately, as you continue down this journey, you're going to be helping other wildlife as well. So there's a lot of really great benefits that increase our interest in birds. So what is that equipment that you need? Well, one thing that's really, really helpful is having some type of field guide, right? You can see a bird, you know that you're looking at something, but most of us, now that we're here in this beginning birding stage, we want to know what we are looking at. And so a good field guide is going to be very beneficial. And that can be an old-fashioned book, a paper field guide. It can be an app on your phone. There's a lot of different options out there for you. Another thing that you're definitely going to want is a pair of binoculars. And I recommend a good pair of binoculars. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars on, the really fancy ones like Zeiss and that sort of thing. but I would not skimp. I'd get yourself a good pair, you know, $100 or $200 pair, because it's going to make the sport more enjoyable. If you get a pair that's not that expensive, there's a reason it's not that expensive, right? It's going to have poor focus. It might give you some different fatigue in your eyes. The images won't be as great. So I recommend, you know, putting the work into it and getting a reputable pair of binoculars when you start off. Get a notebook so you can start taking notes on the different birds you see or the characteristics that you see. We have a lot of photographers that are also birders, and they are really great at documenting the different birds that they see in different areas. Anywhere you go, there's probably going to be some sort of bird list that goes along with it. I know here at Horicon Marsh, we have a checklist that is basically all the birds you could potentially see at the marsh, and people come and pick that up every time they stop at our education center. And then for birding, it takes a lot of patience, right? So birds are fast, they're small, they have wings, they don't always sit still. And sometimes you do have to be nice and patient just to get that good, perfect look at whatever it is that's out there. So when you have all these tools and you are enjoying some time out in nature or having your cup of coffee for breakfast, you want to look at some different things that are going to help you identify the bird. We call these bird characteristics. And so some of the things we'll be looking for are mentioned here: plumage, size, silhouette, the songs, behavior, and habitat. Really starting to get to know these different aspects are going to help you narrow down what type of bird it is you might be seeing. And so we start a little bit with plumage, and plumage is just a fancy word for colors, right? And so starting to know the different colors that our birds are going to be can be very beneficial, because they don't always stay the same color, which sometimes makes birding a little more complicated. So for example, these pictures here, these are the exact same bird. These are both American goldfinch. These are both male American goldfinch. So in the winter, they lose that bright yellow coloration that we think of that they have in the summer here. And so a lot of times I'll get phone calls and I'll say, oh, all my goldfinch are gone. And I say, no, you just might want to look at your birds a little bit more closely. Your goldfinches have lost that bright, vibrant color and have turned into this very drab olivey color, even the males. And then as winter progresses, you're going to see that every day they get a little more yellow and a little more yellow. And so there are a number of birds that will change their plumage when they are not in the breeding season. So you have to do a little bit more learning with that. Plus, we have different plumages for our males and our females. Some look the same, others do not. Typically, our males are going to be the more vibrant, the ones that have the brighter coloration, because they are using those colors to show off for the females. The females, for the most part, are going to be more natural colored, your browns, your whites, your blacks, so that they can blend in. Because for most of our bird species, the females are the ones that are sitting on the eggs. And so they can't have those vibrant colors because they will attract a predator more than likely. And so you'll notice that in many of our species, these are hooded mergansers here, our drake or our male is much more flamboyant and colorful than our hen or our female back here. And here's another example in our waterfowl. So we have our hen wood duck in the front and our beautiful male wood duck drake in the back. The other thing that we look at that's really helpful is common sizes. We get a lot of people that come in or call me that say, I saw this bird and I'm trying to figure out what it was. And one of the things I always ask them is about what their relative size was, because that can make a big difference in identification. So we all know general shapes and sizes of specific birds that we see quite often. So like a robin. So I would ask in reference, you know, is it larger or smaller than a robin? Or, for example, larger or smaller than a sparrow, or larger or smaller shaped like a duck. So these are all different images that we have in our head, but are very easy to give some relative sizes when we are trying to do an identification on a bird that we're just not quite sure of. The other thing we want to look at are the different parts of a bird. Now, I know this looks like there's a lot here, and there is, and you certainly don't have to memorize every part of a bird that we're going to be looking at. But when we're looking at a bird in our binoculars, you really want to focus on the things that stand out the most. Which characteristics do you see? Are they noticeable? And these are just some of the things you want to look at. So you want to look at the top of the head, the crown. Some of our birds are even named after what color the top of their head is. We have white crowned sparrows that are there. So look at the crown and the cap See if they have an eye stripe through their eye. See what the back of their neck looks like and their back in general. Their shoulder will sometimes have wing bars on them. They'll have stripes. Sometimes they'll have multiple stripes. Sometimes they won't have any. When they're in flight, take a look at the wing. What does it look like? Is it rounded? Is it narrow? Is it angled? What does the wing look like? Take a look at the backside, at the rump. We have little warblers that come through in the spring that are called yellow rumped warblers because they have this little yellow spot on their bottom. People call them butterbutts. You might hear that as well. So take a look at that backside. Look at their tail. Is it squared off? Is it forked? Is it pointy? Is it really wide? Is it really narrow? What does that tail look like? And then also underneath the tail, what's the belly or the feet or the side or the breast, like our rose-breasted grosbeaks? What kind of colors do you see there? And then of course, look at their beak, because their beak can tell us a lot of information about what they eat and the habitat they might be in. So we're going to do a little quiz here, and I think we should be able to use the chat for this. Hopefully, we are going to do some comparisons as far as beaks, because beaks really make a big difference as far as what these birds are going to be eating and what we can look for. And it'll also tie in later to what we should be feeding them. So we've got this great horned owl right here. And I want you to put in the chat 1, 2, or 3. Which one of these tools do you think best represents the beak of our great horned owl? I'll give you just a second to put 1, 2, or 3 into the chat, and we'll test everything out and make sure it's working. I see some things coming in. Awesome. All right, I see some 1s, I see some 3s. So let's see what the answer is. All right, so if you said 2, actually, that is the most representative. So our great horned owl has a beak that is like a scissors. It is for ripping and tearing and cutting of the meat that it is eating. So we've got our great horned owl that has a beak very much like a scissors. All right, we're going to try this again. We've got another one. I have a few of these. Here we go. So we have our pileated woodpecker or pileated woodpecker, depending on who you talk to. So what do you think here? Which one of these tools is representative of this beak that it has here? And you can go ahead and put that in the chat, 1, 2, or 3. All right, seeing these come in. So here is the correct answer for our woodpecker. There we go. So they have a beak very much like a tweezer's. It is strong and it is sharp and pointy, and it can get way into those little nooks and crannies of the tree and in the holes that they have excavated out with their tweezers. So very good. And we have one more. We have our cardinal. So again, which tool is representative of the beak that this particular bird has? So this is our cardinal. And you can put that in the chat once you think you know the answer. All right, seeing answers coming in. Wonderful. So it looks like most of you got it. This is a nutcracker. So this is basically a pliers. So this beak is very, very thick, very strong, very much like a pliers. And these are going to be cracking a lot of seeds open. Okay, so now we're going to match the food to the bird. And this one I think should be a little bit easier. So we've got our great horned owl again. We've got some different types of food over here on the right. So go ahead and type in the number of the food that you think this bird is going to be eating. All right, looks like most of those answers are in, and I am seeing a lot of 1s, and you got it. So that little mouse is probably going to be dinner time for our great horned owl, as well as many other small rodents that they are catching in the forest at night. So very good. All right, now to our pileated woodpecker. So it's got that tweezer-like beak, right? So what is it going to be going after? You can go ahead and put that in the chat. 1, 2, or 3. All right, so this one's a little tricky because a lot of woodpeckers will eat sunflowers, some of our smaller woodpeckers, but for our pileated woodpeckers, they're going to be going after a lot of our insects as well. That's going to be the main use for that particular beak, although they will eat some sunflower seeds as well. So a little bit of a trick question there. How about this one, our cardinal, last one. What do we think that they are going to be eating? All right, so 2 is the answer. It looks like everybody got that one. So again, our cardinal has that seed cracking beak for these wonderful sunflower seeds. It's going to be a great food to put out for cardinals and many other species as well. So just by looking at that beak, we can learn a lot about the particular bird, about what they're eating, what we could potentially put out in our yards, and how we could bring them and attract them to our area. And so this is a really important adaptation that birds have. And adaptations can be a couple of different things. They can be a physical characteristic, or it can be a behavior. So the different beak shakes are a physical adaptation of each bird to help them eat different things. If all of the birds were eating the same thing, we wouldn't have near the diversity that we have. And so having those different beaks is really critical in that. We also have behavioral adaptations where we have birds that will migrate to find food, or they will migrate to find a nesting location. And so that's a change in their behavior, their actions, and what they do. And so we'll see that very often when we're birding, especially during migration. We know the phenology of when these birds start coming back into the state of Wisconsin or when they start leaving the state of Wisconsin. And that can help us in our identifications quite a bit. And it's a lot of fun. So here's just a handful of backyard birds you probably already know. And if you don't, hopefully you'll get a little bit better glimpse of them as well. So here's some of the different woodpeckers that are more common in our backyard. Pileated can be common if you have a really, really, really great woods around you, but they need a very big woods. So things like the kettle moraine up here, the northern unit of the kettle moraine, are a really good spot for pileated woodpeckers. In Dodge County, where I'm in, it's not an occurrence that we see too often. However, these woodpeckers are downy and hairy woodpeckers, and they are very common at backyard feeders. This one on the right and the one in the middle are both downy woodpeckers. They're a little bit smaller. The one with the red on the back of its head is a male. The other one is the female. And then next to it on the left, this is our hairy woodpecker. And they all look very, very similar. The way that I tell people to help with their identification, if they're not sitting next to each other, which they typically are not, is the hairy woodpecker, their beak is about as long as the length of their head. And the downy woodpecker has a beak that's about half the length of its head. And then it's a little bit smaller as well. So if you start looking at that beak length, it really makes a difference in your identification for these two. And you'll see them quite frequently in your backyards and in a lot of rural and urban areas as well. So our black-capped chickadee, they are very common in our backyard spaces, typically going after thistle or sunflower seeds if you have those in your feeders. This is our red-bellied woodpecker. It's a little misleading because it does not actually have that much of a red belly. Some people mistake them for a red-headed woodpecker, but a red-headed woodpecker will have a full red head all the way across. This one just has a little mohawk on the back. This is our blue jay. Sometimes people call these the bully of the birding world because they can chase off some of your other more interesting birds, but they are most certainly a native and one that is good to have around your neighborhood as well. I always say that blue jays are good at telling you if you have predators around. So if you have a hawk or an owl in your neighborhood, it's more than likely that these jays are going to make a huge ruckus to let other jays and other birds know that they're there. So if you ever hear a lot of crows and a lot of jays just going crazy, you might want to look a little closer and see if you've got a hawk or an owl somewhere nearby. And then, of course, if you live anywhere where there's a little creek or a little stream or just a little bit of water nearby, it's entirely possible you're going to see a red-winged blackbird, kind of one of those birds of the springtime that when they start coming back, you know that winter is about over. And for us at Horicon Marsh, we have a bazillion of them, but they are a wonderful sight in the springtime when they start coming back from migration. This is one that we don't enjoy having around all that much. It's known as a house sparrow or the English sparrow. It is an invasive species. It's exotic. did not come here. And so this is a species that if you do have, they can be very aggressive to our natives, especially those that are cavity nesters. And cavity nesters are birds that live in holes in trees or in our bluebird boxes that we might put up. And so house sparrows are very aggressive and will actually go in and kill the young birds that are in there. They'll kick out the eggs, and it's not good for our native species. So one of the ways excuse me, that you can deter these guys is by feeding really good quality food, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This is a white-breasted nuthatch, and this is a very common one that you will see in your neighborhoods and your backyards. They are typically going up and down tree trunks, and they will go headfirst down the tree trunk, which is a really unique aspect of these particular species. And of course, we have our cardinal, one of those birds that starts singing in February. And I know my pair of cardinal love to sing at like 3:45 in the morning when the mating season starts. So I can always be guaranteed that they are my wake up call on spring mornings, which is fun for the most part. This is a bird in our backyard that gets a bad rap. It's called a common grackle. A lot of people just think they look mean, right? They've got that black body with that ominous yellow eye. But, these are a nice common species and one that will eat a lot of your food, but they're certainly a welcome species and they're doing very well. So if you have a backyard or a park or somewhere that has a lot of songbirds or other types of backyard birds, it's more than likely that you're going to have some sort of predator. And you have to remember that they've got to eat as well. And so it's entirely possible that you're going to have some predator activity if you are actively bringing in and feeding birds. And so we just tell people that although it might be annoying that this Cooper's hawk here ate one of your little house finches like they did at my house and didn't eat the house sparrows, we do have to realize that these are predators and they have to find a way to eat as well. And our buffet of birds that we provide are certainly welcome to them. So things that you might find in your backyard, especially if you're in a little bit more suburban area, are things like Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, and even possibly red-tailed hawks. This is a red-tailed hawk at our education center that came and landed right on the feeder. And this red-winged blackbird was none too pleased that he was there and was continuously bombarding it as it was going along. So predators are real and they are out there, and it's entirely possible you're going to have them, but welcome them because they are a wonderful part of the food chain as well. So what is it that you can add to your yard? We talk about all these birds that could be in your backyard, but how can we make your backyard or your property or wherever you are better for the species that are out there? And so the things we always tell people is keep it simple, right? Animals, wildlife, humans need a couple of different things to help them survive. Food, water, and shelter are kind of the biggest things that if you can provide some sort of aspect of those, you're going to have a much better chance of bringing in wildlife to your yard. So water is a big one. This slide is from a winter program that I did because there's a lot of winter-friendly bird baths out there, or just areas that birds can get water. They're heated, but there's also plenty that you can have out in the summer. So the thing that we always stress for water is to make sure that it is cleaned, and it is cleaned frequently. It's like if you have a dog or a cat or any other pet, you're going to change that water every day, if not multiple times a day. You're going to make sure those bowls are nice and clean. Same thing for those birds. You do not want to have stagnant water in there that's getting mold or bacteria because it can be detrimental to the birds. So if you're going to put out any sort of water feature, please make sure that you clean it, and you clean it really well for those birds that are out there. Especially as we start getting into the summer and it gets super hot, you may have to clean that more frequently as bacteria or mold or algae grows on those water features. You also want to provide some kind of shelter. Shelter could mean a couple different things. It could mean putting up a box like this bluebird box here and giving them shelter and nesting areas. Or it could just mean putting up and planting native plants. I'm a big proponent of putting in native plants because it gives you a lot of different things. Not only does it give birds shelter when they are in full bloom, also in the winter, and it gives them food. So many of our species are nectar feeding species, excuse me. And then in the winter, they're going to be eating the seeds. So if you can put in some native shrubs, native trees, native grasses and forbs, it's it's going to be more bang for your buck as far as being able to provide food and shelter, which is a really great addition. And then if you're interested, you can feed the birds. During the summer, it's not as critical. There's so much natural food out there for them that they may not come to the feeders all that often. Unless we have a really cold spell or a rainy spell, then it might be useful. But for the most part, they are finding a lot more food out in nature. And during the nesting season, a good chunk of our bird species are not eating that much of the seed. They're insects, because it's higher protein and it's better for those young that they are feeding. But these are a handful of different options that you have as far as how to feed birds and what to feed birds. And we'll kind of go through each one to talk about which birds you're going to be attracting. So suet is definitely one that I do not recommend putting out in the summer. Basically, suet is some sort of seed or nut or food that has a fat layer around it that's helping it get held into these little suet cakes. You can buy them just about anywhere, or you can make your own. And in the summer, these just get really messy because when it gets hot, that suet, that fat, it just melts and it makes a big mess, and they don't really need it. But this is a great food to feed in the winter time if you have that opportunity. It brings in chickadees, nuthatches, and a number of different woodpeckers as well. And as I said, some people prefer to make their own. You can get fat from your local butchers. If you're a deer hunter, some deer hunters will save the fat off their harvest and just melt it down, and they'll make their own suet cakes. So if you're into that type of sustainability for our birds, you can certainly do that. So thistle is another. This is a very small, tiny seed. It's also known as Niger seed. And you'll notice in many of the hardware stores or lawn and garden stores, they'll have what's called a sock feeder. And it's basically just a really fine mesh. And the birds that eat thistle are going to have a really thin, narrow beak. They can get into these little holes of the sock feeder, and it keeps the thistle in. Otherwise, you have a pretty big mess with that. So any type of finch is going to be really great. Goldfinch, house finch. In the winter, you'll get junco and red poles that are coming in as well. And so that's really helpful. The food for the thistle that does end up on the ground, a lot of times that's really great for our juncos in the winter time. And if I get down to the bottom of our thistle feeder, there's only like a ½ inch or an inch left, I'll just dump that on the ground right underneath. And it's great for our juncos. You're going to have a whole pile of them there, and then they'll just refill the feeder. We always say if you're only going to feed one food, if you don't want to buy all these different foods to the birds, choose a black oil sunflower seed. This is by far the best type of food that you can give to the birds, and it's going to bring in the most diverse species. So cardinals, grosbeaks, any type of finch, sparrows, the good sparrows, not our house sparrows, nuthatches, chickadees, plus a variety more are going to be feeding out of these sunflower seed feeders. So again, if you're only going to be feeding out of one type of food, this is the one that we could recommend. I know a lot of people use mixed seed that you can get because it's a little bit less expensive. It's got like millet and cracked corn and things in there. Well, there's a reason that it's a little bit less expensive, is because there's a lot of just filler in there. And, as humans, we always talk about, snacking and filler, and it's not good for us, right? But it's not really great for the birds, and they don't really prefer it. They want to have, if they're eating, they want to get the things that have the most protein. And most of the time that millet and that cracked corn just ends up on the ground and is food for squirrels or house sparrows. They really love that junk food. And so if you can take the junk food out of the bird's diet, you're going to bring in the good ones, and you're going to automatically start weeding out some of those less desirable species just by spending a few extra dollars on a really good quality food. So something, it makes a huge difference, and I highly recommend it. In the springtime, jam and oranges is a great way to put food out for your feeders. And typically May 1st is the date that we say start putting those out, especially for our orioles as they're coming back through our migration. We still have our jam feeder out. I'm looking at it right now. And as we get into the season where we have young orioles coming, they're still eating it like crazy. So if you're lucky enough to have nesting orioles in your neighborhood, you could probably keep your jam feeder out for quite some time. A lot of people, they'll get like a 1 to 2 week burst of piles and piles of orioles, and then it'll just stop. And that's because they're all sitting on eggs, and they transition into more insects for a while until the young have fledged, and then they teach them how to eat the jam. So if you start seeing orioles flying around again midsummer, maybe try putting that jam and that orange feeder back out, and you might be surprised to get some young orioles that are feeding at it, which is pretty fun. Same thing for the hummingbirds. May 1st is the date that we typically say have those hummingbird feeders out and ready. Even a little bit sooner is not going to hurt anything for those really early migrants that are coming through. And you'll notice in the stores that there are a lot of pre-mixed food that has a red tint to it. And we don't recommend that. There's really no need to have that red tint to the hummingbird food. A lot of it has a red dye, which has been proven, to humans not to be really great, and it's not necessarily or not good for the birds either. So we want to try to avoid that at all costs. You can actually make your own hummingbird food, and it's really easy. All you do is take 4 parts water to 1 part sugar, and you mix that together, you boil it, you get it all dissolved, and that's all you need. Super cheap, super easy, and it's going to be very healthy and exactly the right ratio for what these hummingbirds need. And if you have a little bit of extra, it stores in the fridge for a while as you keep refilling those feeders. So as long as you have a hummingbird feeder that has some sort of red and yellow flowers as part of the feeder, there is no need to have that red dye for the food. They're going to find it, I promise you. And if you like to plant natives, like I said, I do, one of the greatest flowers you can plant is something called cardinal flower. It's definitely a hummingbird magnet, one that they absolutely love, and will be coming back for time and time again. And then once you get all that out in your yard, you put in these native shrubs, these grasses, these forbs, you get all your bird feeders out. Then the beauty is you just get to watch, right? And you get to start tallying how many species are coming to your yard after you've made it more wildlife friendly. And I guarantee you that once you start watching, there's going to be a lot more species coming through than you ever imagined were there. It's pretty exciting. We used to live right in Mayville, which is a town just to the east of Horicon Marsh. And we had over 100 species in our little 1/4 acre lot in the middle of town. Once we started just looking, all these pictures here are actually from that particular property. And so if you do a good job and you get the right food out there in the right conditions, there's going to be a lot coming through, which is really exciting. So things from bluebirds, this is a cedar waxwing in the center, our goldfinch, of course, our oriole who's eating at our hummingbird feeder. And this hummingbird down here was super exciting. It's a rufous hummingbird, which is a vagrant from the west. And he actually came back to our house twice, 2 summers in a row, because we had it banded and we knew it was the same bird, which was pretty exciting. So if you watch, there's great things. And then of course, there's always resources out there. There are apps for everything, right? One of my favorite apps for birds is either iBird, this is a good one, or the Audubon Birds app. It's like having a giant field guide literally at your fingertips, but it's more because it's got sounds, it's got range maps, it's got a pile of different pictures. So there's all sorts of really great options out there. There's Peterson field guides, Sibley field guides. There's guides to songs. So if you get really good and get really interested, you can start learning to bird by ear, which is one of my favorite things to do. Don't even need a pair of binoculars, just all you need is your ears, which is really, really great as well. And then, like I said, there's a variety of local bird clubs that are out there. These are ones kind of in our area. I'm sure there's some in Jefferson County, and I'm just drawing a blank on what the bird club is in that area. But if you look or Google, I'm sure it will pop up, no problem. And our bird clubs are always interested in bringing more people into birding, because it is such a fun opportunity to meet new people and get out and explore and enjoy the natural resources that we have. So I highly recommend that you look up your local birding clubs, because they are more than willing to take you under their wings, literally, and go on field trips and help you to become a better birder. it's a lot of fun for us to be able to do. So certainly look that up if you can. So we're hoping that we get a chance to see you out there at some point. I highly recommend coming out to Horicon Marsh if you haven't. It is one of the best birding locations, not just in the state of Wisconsin, but in the Midwest. We have people coming from all across the country when we have our big birding festivals. We've seen over 300 species of birds throughout the years. And every time of year you come, you're going to see something different, which is what I love. This is our education center, which is back open to the public now. We just opened last week, which is super exciting. And so we are starting to do some in-person programs as well, including some birding programs and birding hikes. And if you haven't been to our education center, when you get there, you will be greeted by Curly, our giant woolly mammoth, and of course, the one who is going after him. And if you're interested in the Horicon Marsh and the history of the marsh, our Explorium is also open, which is basically our hands-on exhibits that tell you all about the history of Horicon Marsh, from the glaciers to European settlers to present day. We even have an airboat simulator where you can take a drive on an airboat out on the marsh, which is pretty cool. So lots of great opportunities for birding and for getting out and enjoying our natural resources. And I hope that whatever spark or interest you had in birding has maybe flamed up a little bit more. And I'm most certainly would welcome any questions. I see there's a couple things in the chat I can pop to, but if you have any questions about birding or Horicon Marsh or ways to get into this hobby more, I would love and welcome all those questions or comments as well. If you've got any great birding stories, I love to hear those too. So thanks everybody, and appreciate the time here tonight.
Thanks, Liz. I think we'll start with the questions. I see one in the Q&A already. We have a bird feed mix that contains nuts and dried fruit. What birds will this attract?
Yes, so that type of mix is a good mix. We use that at our house, and we use that a lot in the winter time, and that's going to attract quite a bit. You're going to get a lot of your winter species with larger beaks. It's going to be great for your cardinals, your blue jays. We get red-winged blackbirds at that. This spring, if you have a cool spring and you have an area that's really conducive for bluebird habitat, we have bluebirds nesting in our backyard, and they just pounded away at that fruit and nut seed when we had that really cold stretch this spring, because there was just no insects for them to find. So we've found that that fruit and nut mix can be really, really, really beneficial, especially if there's a cold stretch in early spring for a lot of species. Even robins will sometimes go there for the fruit. Anything in the thrush family, like bluebirds and robins, they will switch sources of food between insects and then nuts and berries quite frequently. So it's a good mix to have out there. The mix that I'm referring to that's not always the best quality are the ones that have more of the cracked corn and the millet and just the filler, junkier stuff. But the fruit and nut one is a good one. So good question.
Another question I see is that we have a group of turkey vultures living in the pines above our house. Can you tell me more about them and anything we should know?
Yeah, that's really cool. So turkey vultures are a great native species. They are, so my daughter, who is 3, has named the turkey vultures that fly over our house. All of them are named garbage disposal. So we'll be sitting in the backyard at the picnic table, and she'll just point and she'll say, "Oh, there goes garbage disposal," because that's exactly what they do. They are basically nature's cleaners uppers, and they will eat just about anything as long as it is dead. So a lot of times you will have turkey vultures that will roost in a particular area. And it sounds like you have one of those areas that's just perfect roost site that they tend to go back to time and time again. And it's not necessarily a nesting site. Turkey vultures are going to nest on the ground. They'll nest in logs. Sometimes you'll find turkey vultures that will nest up in old barns. We have people who have old dilapidated deer stands that, if they haven't checked them in years and they go back, they'll have turkey vultures nesting in the deer stands. So they're a very cool bird, a very necessary bird, although they might not get a lot of credit for that. because they do clean up a lot of roadkill and dead species that are out there and are basically just, nature's scavengers and a really great species. So it's cool to be able to see that many in our backyard. We have a friends volunteer with us that lives just kitty corner to a cemetery that she helps upkeep and run. And she had the same thing. She had a whole pile of turkey vultures that were roosting in a cemetery. And she has some really amazing pictures of that. So very cool that you've got that. It's exciting.
I actually have a question.
Great.
I had a scarlet tanager fly into my window. It was so sad. It was dead.
Yeah.
I'd never actually seen them in my yard. Are they pretty common?
So scarlet tanagers are typically going to be coming through on migration in the springtime. Starting around May 1st is when we start seeing the first come and trickle through. It's not very typical that they nest in our part of the state. They're going to be going a little bit further north, but they will certainly be passing through on migration as they come through. You might get a handful that nest down here, but it's pretty rare. Usually they go a little bit further north. But unfortunately, windows are one of those hazards that birds face. And there are a lot of birds that are killed by windows, that are killed by cats that are left outdoors. So they face a lot of challenges coming into our neighborhoods and that type of thing. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but happens all too often.
Are there any other questions that people have? While we're waiting to see if anyone types anything else in chat or Q&A, my other question I had is regarding cardinals.
Okay.
And they like my yard, so much so that they like to build nests in my bushes. And then I have baby cardinals kind of all over the place, like on my sidewalk, on my porch. Is there anything I can do to make a different place better for them, or should I just feel lucky?
I would feel lucky. I've never had a cardinal nest in my yard, or at least not that I've been able to see. I'm pretty sure they have somewhere, but I can't find it. So I would consider yourself lucky, and just enjoy the fact that your bushes are the prime habitat for those cardinals. If you want to share what bushes you have, maybe other people would put those in because they want cardinals nesting in your yard, in their yard. But yeah, I mean, that's really fun to be able to have them and to see them up close and see what you have.
I think it's just a juniper bush. I'll have to go home and look at the species, but
Okay.
literally, I mean, it was like a cardinal alert. We had to clear it because they came out and then they were like on my picnic table and we were really afraid, a cat or somebody was going to step
Right.
on them.
Well, and when they first fledge out of the nest, they're so awkward and they can't fly all that well. So yeah, they literally are, like you said, just hopping all over the place until they can get their wings underneath them a little bit better. And then they'll probably spread throughout the neighborhood a little bit more after that. But those first couple of days after they fledge, they're pretty awkward for a little bit.
I see we have one more question. How do some seeds sprout and some don't?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know if some seed companies put something on the seeds to keep them from sprouting, or if it's just the right conditions. That I don't have a really good answer for on that. It might just be doing a little sleuthing on the bag and seeing if it's treated with anything or not. That's something to consider as well, that there's a lot of information out there about like neonics and how we don't want seeds and plants treated with that because of its impact on pollinators. And so it might be worthwhile taking a little bit closer look at some of the seed mixes to see if anything's been treated in there. But I don't know for sure which ones are going to be germinating more than others, or if it's more of a seed specific or a brand specific type of thing.
All right. Well, do we have any more questions? If you do, type them in the chat or the Q&A. Otherwise, I think we'll wind up here. Don't see anything else. I'm going to stop the recording.